Good to have you in Lakeland.
Oh my gosh, I'm so happy to be here.
It's your first time in Lakeland.
Yes, but not Florida. I've been to Tampa a couple times in Orlando.
Yep. Mm-hmm. We like to say that we're between Disney World and the Gulf here in Central Florida. Central Florida is a special place.
That's what you like to say?
That's what we say. Like, what's Lakeland? We're like, well, it's Central Florida. It's Polk County, but we're between Tampa, which is the Gulf, and St. Pete's Beach, and we're over there by Disney World. Actually, a lot of our students get Disney World passes. They come here, their parents drop them off. It's like, what are we going to do? They hit the Wawa, they hit Culver's.
Nice.
And then they're like, okay, we've done the Lakeland thing. Now what? So students will leave here around 4:00 after classes and be there and have the entire evening to themselves.
So cool. I mean, I grew up in Orange County, California, so we were close to Disneyland.
Yeah.
But I mean, I've been really enjoying walking around the campus. It's so beautiful and obviously different scenery than California, but it's like the lake and the greenery. Mm-hmm. It's an amazing campus.
Yeah, we love being in Florida. I'm from Michigan, so being in Florida is now the dream, getting out of that. But
totally.
You have a nice spot. I mean, Cali it's hard to compete with California. I think just about everybody's impressed with Florida until a Californian shows up.
Probably.
And you're just like, yep, this is Florida.
We're definitely spoiled in California.
Yeah. So you've been there your whole life?
Yes. So I was born in San Luis Obispo, which is Central California. And my family, we moved down to Orange County when I was about 7 years old, and we've been there ever since.
And one of the things I remember maybe most about you, the first time that I met you was in California. I was working with Yes University, and then I saw your content, being someone who's young and even then younger, and you were talking about your heart that you had for the persecuted church. You're the founder of For the Martyrs and March for the Martyrs, two organizations. Or it's one organization, right?
It's one organization. So For the Martyrs is the organization, and then we're really known for our March for the Martyrs. So a lot of people just know the organization as that. Yeah.
There's a lot to kind of unpack with you on this. So help me as I kind of dial this in for a second. But I recounted being so impressed with somebody whose concern is for the persecuted church and being so young and leading your own organization. So maybe you can tell me what For the Martyrs does, its objectives. And then after you do that, explain how you dialed that in. Because I remember before you'd mentioned to me, and you can tell this, about how you kind of had this own plan for your life. And then how...
Like we all do.
Like we all do. I was supposed to be in the NBA.
Yeah.
I was supposed to be out there playing against LeBron, and somehow I'm at SCU. And then you dialed it into focusing on Christian persecution. And I remember you explained how God blessed that. So kind of take me back to what For the Martyrs is, and then how that all got started for you, Gia.
Absolutely. So For the Martyrs exists to raise awareness about the crisis of Christian persecution, advocate for religious freedom, and provide aid to suffering Christians. It all began when I started traveling with my grandmother. She's my hero. She's so awesome. My mom and my grandmother, I would not be where I am today without them. And so my grandmother has been a missionary. She's been in ministry for now, I think, over 40 years, which is unbelievable. And I grew up hearing the stories of my grandmother's travels, and she did a lot of work with the persecuted church. I love sharing the story that she smuggled Bibles into communist China on multiple occasions, which is, I mean, if you really think about smuggling Bibles into communist China and having to go through security checkpoints, having, guards and red guards following you around, secret police tracking you. It's just unbelievable to kind of wrap our minds around now. So I grew up hearing those stories, and I actually traveled with my grandmother to Egypt for the first time when I was 12 years old. I don't know how my mom allowed me to do that.
I think at 12 I went to Atlanta, Georgia.
Yeah, and I remember my grandma had me speak to one of her pastors' conferences, and I had no idea at the time that, of course, right? I mean, I'm 12 years old, but I really had no concept of what Christian persecution was truly and the significance of the pastors' conference in Egypt. But I really feel like that was a God moment because, almost 10 years later, I traveled again with my grandmother to Egypt. As you said, I was living my dream life. I had my, dream career, whatever. I was just living my life in California, happy from the outside looking in. But in reality, I felt like there was something more for me. And my mom, growing up, always instilled in us having a personal relationship with Jesus, and also that God had a special plan for our life. And although outside looking in, I had everything that you could want, I was yearning for that special plan, right? That God supposedly had for my life. So I said a simple prayer. I said, God, I know that anyone who is in you is a new creation. I know I'm Christian, but I'm not really living as a Christian. Can you come into my life and show me what I'm supposed to do? Long story short, he turned my life upside down. And 2 weeks later, I was in Egypt and my grandmother let me come on a trip with her. And that was the first time in my adult life that I was exposed to the persecuted church. And being in Egypt at her pastor's conference, surrounded by hundreds of Christians who were willing to lay down their life for Christ. I mean, if we really try to grasp the radical faith that it takes to be willing to sacrifice everything and even die for the gospel, it's hard as Americans to truly wrap our head around that. And so hearing those stories, I was just truthfully convicted that I had my comfortable Christianity. You know, I was sometimes going to church, but I wasn't really living as a Christian. Hearing that there were young people, it wasn't just the older generation, it was people my age and even younger who were willing to die for Christ. I rededicated myself to the Lord in Egypt and began traveling with my grandmother throughout the Middle East. And that was the beginning of my work with the persecuted church.
I'd love to talk to you about the persecuted church, and I have questions for you on that. But I do want to focus in on the fact that you're so young when God places this in your heart. I think about our students at SEU and the conversations I've had with just, not all of them, just some of them, and they've expressed their growing awareness, I should say, of the persecuted church. And maybe there's something there that they'd like to do, but that is, it seems to me that might be very big for them to wrap their head around. And then after that, it's like, I have this heart for people who are being persecuted. What do I do and where do I begin? So I think about you. You go there to Egypt. You're exposed to the persecuted church. God places this in your heart. And now you run a successful ministry, which relatively speaking isn't that far from when God called you. And you've done all this in a relatively short amount of time. So for the students that are listening, how did Gia get started? How did you go from having this dream in your heart to it starting to materialize and you begin to kind of put flesh to it and run a successful organization? Like, where did you get started?
After that first trip to Egypt, I knew that I was never going to be the same. And I knew that I was not going to go back to, business as usual when I returned back to the United States. And I think even my family was surprised at how, quickly and radical this change in my behavior and just personhood was, because truly I came back and I was like all for Jesus. Like, it sounds funny to say, but it's true.
You got a WWJD bracelet?
Yeah. Oh, totally. So I didn't initially know that I wanted to focus only on serving persecuted Christians, but I knew that I wanted to keep traveling with my grandma. I knew I had a lot to learn and I just was really hungry. So I asked my grandmother if I could work for her organization. And over the next 3 years, she mentored me and I continued to travel with her. And I think despite being her grandchild, she really took it seriously that she needed to mentor me and then also kind of take on a pastoral role of, okay, this is what it means to live a godly life. And I think that that's kind of something that's lacking in the church today, is that we look so much like the world and we compromise in little ways, but in reality, that ends up being a bigger compromise than we realize. So I think that training under my grandmother with how to be a woman of God, how to work in the ministry, how to operate, and also how to run a nonprofit. I can't tell you how much I learned just from observing how my grandmother ran her missions, how she ran her organization, what she did to set up sustainable projects on the ground, how she connected with people. that was really invaluable. And I think really by the grace of God, somehow I understood that serving under my grandma's leadership was meant to prepare me, and I needed to be just hungry and teachable.
Mm-hmm.
So as we continued to travel, we were doing a lot of work in the Middle East, although it wasn't, only the Middle East. But every time that we would return and we, again, were working with these persecuted Christians, my heart was just on fire. I had such a heavy burden for the persecuted church. And whether we were in Egypt or working with Christians who suffered directly under ISIS, as we kept hearing these stories and I continued to do research into the reality of persecution, I learned that Christians are the most persecuted religious group in the world. 1/3 of the world faces religious oppression, and Christians make up 80% of the oppressed. So if that's true, and it's not just in Iraq, Syria, and Egypt, but it's actually global that Christians are being persecuted, why are we not talking about this? Why are we not, having this sense of urgency to do something as the church in the United States to help our brothers and sisters? And so after 3 years of working with my grandmother and really just being prayerful about how God wanted to use me and being open to it, and just through prayer, I, went out kind of boldly. I was 23 years old when I founded For the Martyrs, and I started the organization when I was 23.
Did you feel that was heavy? I mean, at 23, people are doing all kinds of things, and no discredit to them. They're chasing their dreams. But then you think at 23, somebody's like, well, what are you doing? I'm helping the persecuted church. Was it heavy to carry that sort of calling?
Definitely hearing the stories and doing so much research. I mean, the things that I read every single day, the stories of the persecuted church. I mean, we're looking at mass murder of believers. What's happening in Nigeria? There's a genocide of Christians happening in Nigeria right now. Over 7,000 Christians have been killed this year alone, and we're getting reports every week of something happening. So learning about those stories, reading them, hearing them, it's definitely heavy. But one thing that you realize is that the persecuted church is not a depressed, downtrodden people. They are full of joy, and they have a fire in them that I have yet to see with any other people. And I think it is because when you are persecuted, you have to make the decision to be a Christian in a country where you're going to be persecuted for your faith. You have to make the decision, am I willing to die for my faith? Am I willing to lay down my life for Christ? Do I really believe this? And when you make that decision, it changes how you live. If you are willing to die for your faith, it changes everything about how you live. And so they have this overwhelming joy. There's so many incredible stories coming out of the persecuted church of unbelievable miracles and people giving their lives to Christ, and the stories of the underground evangelism that's happening in places like Iran. So as much as it's a heavy burden, the stories of overcoming and the victory that's in Christ gives me so much hope. And I think that I'm so continually inspired by the stories of the persecuted church. But I will say, I mean, at 23 years old, I think I was pretty naive. And I think that was a good thing, because I thought, hey, this is going to be easy. Let's start this movement and it's going to catch like wildfire and we're going to do this thing. And you're right. By the grace of God, we've been able to accomplish so much in just the 5 years that we've been established. But yeah, it wasn't always easy.
Yeah, in 5 years, I mean, just 5 years you've been established. It's pretty incredible to see how God has used you and to raise awareness and raise support for what's taking place. I do want to ask, where is persecution taking place in the world right now? Because I think if you did ask Christians, the average Christian, who's not completely informed, they might say the Middle East, they might say North Korea. Mm-hmm. But beyond that, I'm not sure that they would actually really know beyond that.
You're right. The fact of the matter is that most Christians in the United States especially are completely unaware of the scale of persecution around the world. And frankly, to no fault of their own, because it's not being covered in the media. Even our Christian, media outlets cover it, but not even, as much as they cover some other issues. And it's not being taught in schools. It's not being talked about by our pastors. So it's really not their fault that they don't know the reality of persecution. You're correct in thinking that most Christians in the United States think of the Middle East. They think of ISIS when they think of the persecuted church. But it's really global that Christians are being persecuted. So, of course, we have the Middle East. We have throughout Africa, we have the Democratic Republic of Congo. We have Rwanda, Sudan, Ethiopia. Those are all countries where Christians face persecution. And then we also have South America, which surprises a lot of people. The rise of communism is leading to the persecution of the church. And throughout South America, we see governments cracking down on pastors and bishops, jailing them, putting them in prison without trial because they'll accuse them of conspiring against the government. Well, what's their crime? It's actually just preaching the gospel and not bowing to the ideology of communism. Also in China. China is one of the most dangerous countries to be a Christian. And the way that they target the church is very covert. So they'll have cameras, facial recognition systems. They monitor what Christians are doing on social media. There is a story that came out of China where this Bible study had a group chat on something called WeChat, which is a little bit like a social media like Facebook here in the United States. It's whatever the equivalent of that is in China. And they were trying to suggest a book, The Imitation of Christ, in the group chat. Well, WeChat automatically censored the word Christ, and it tagged it as the same category as explicit content. So they had to use special characters to be able to write about it. So those are just some examples. But Christian persecution is not only global, but it's increasing every single year. There are more martyrs for the faith today than any other time in church history. And every year, the number of Christians who are persecuted for their faith increases.
It's not something that this sounds probably surprising to most people that are listening. So why do you think then it doesn't get covered, or maybe the news buries it? What's the rationale for that?
I think in the United States, in our politically correct culture, we're taught, especially the church, and not all pastors are like this. There's incredible churches, so it's not that. But I think we're taught to not offend anybody, not to talk about anything too intense, too hard to hear. And I think because of that, pastors are not speaking about the persecuted church. From the media point of view, I think it's because it's politically incorrect to talk about Christian suffering. If we talk about Christian persecution, we then have to answer the question, who is persecuting Christians? And the top two persecutors of the church are communist governments and radical Islam. But we can't say anything about radical Islam. It's not politically correct.
Yeah, so explain that. So why does radical Islam persecute Christians, and what's the intent behind that? Why is it that? Why have they selected Christians to persecute?
The reality is that it's not just Christians. So there are other religious minorities. It's Yazidis, it's Druze communities, which are very old faiths that are in the region of the Middle East. But these extremist groups have somehow made Christianity enemy number one. I think of I think a lot of people, when we picture Christian persecution, you almost picture the 21 Coptic martyrs being walked down the beach and ISIS putting them on their knees. Well, what did ISIS say in that video? It was a warning and a message to all people of the cross that this will be your end. So I think that they seek to silence Christianity, and I think that they are in touch with how powerful the message of Christianity and the gospel really is, because it's the complete Islam. Radical Islam is the absolute antithesis of everything that Christianity is.
Yeah, and so as Westerners see this, I think you would argue that this isn't something that we should be passive about or turn a blind eye to. I mean, do you see this as a threat to Western democracy and the Western world?
Radical Islam?
Yeah.
You know, this is interesting, and I think that I'll probably take some heat for this. I actually don't think that Islam is the boogeyman that is going to, take over the United States. And I've actually done a lot of research in this, because what we're seeing online is these pockets of, and what it really is a high influx of immigrants, legal or otherwise, whether they have refugee status or whatever, from failed states. Okay, so we're talking about Syria, we're talking about Yemen, we're talking about Somalia. So failed states that come in, and because they come from these failed states, they have a high, likelihood of being radicalized and not having a desire to assimilate. But those communities make up a very small percentage of Muslims in the United States. So, for example, many people are surprised to know that 25% of Muslims in the United States are Black Americans. Did you know that?
I didn't know that.
Right. So, and it's really like, if you had to guess the population of Muslims in the United States, what would you guess it is?
No clue.
Less than 2%. So I did a poll on my Instagram asking these questions, and many people guessed over 35%. So do I think radical Islam is a threat to the United States? Yes, in the sense that we could have a terrorist attack. And I think that that is closer than people want to admit. Mm-hmm. But it's certainly we're not going to see the Islamification of the United States. The greater threat to the church in the United States is communism. And it is already here. And I believe that everything that we're seeing online about the Islamification of the United States, I mean, the facts and the numbers are just not there.
Yep.
And it's a distraction from communism.
Okay. Do you feel like, so explain communism, like how, when we say that it's already here and it's a threat, how does that show up? I mean, I know we're talking about, at the moment, the persecution of the church. So you're saying communism is something to be concerned about. How does that show up in our institutions? How does it show up in our society? How does it show up in our mentality and in our culture in general?
Similar to how China doesn't seek to erase Christianity. They don't want to erase religion. They want to control it. They see religion as an opportunity to control the citizens of the country. And they know that if they want to keep control, then they have to have control of the churches and the institutions. So what we're seeing in the United States, for example, in California, we have a governor who is very interested in restricting religious freedom. I mean, we saw it. I know it's kind of hot topic to talk about COVID, but this was actually something that ended up going to the Supreme Court. We had our governor say that we weren't allowed to sing worship. So I believe that if we continue to see that trend of the government wanting to overreach into the church, that is the greater threat. Another example is we had the Equality Act that was passed in Congress in 2021, and then it didn't make it into the Senate. But the Equality Act sought to control what pastors are and aren't allowed to speak on through anti-discrimination laws. So what we're seeing in Europe, they have very severe anti-discrimination laws. So for example, saying male and female, he created them. Even reading from the Bible is something that you can get charged with a hate crime for in the UK and be put in jail. And the Equality Act wanted to introduce those same, the kind of like the precursor to those same laws in the United States.
Yeah. So do you think this is something that's making its way into our educational systems as well?
Oh, absolutely.
What's your observation been as far as our colleges and our universities go?
So the way that communism creeps into the universities, all the institutions, is they want to basically pull away your identity from your religion and from your family. So if they can confuse your identity of where you come from and what you believe in as the higher power, then they can control not just what you say, but what you believe.
So why we see an attack on family, an attack on tradition, an attack on morality, and an attack on God.
Exactly. So if we can get people to betray the things that are very closest to them, confuse them about their identity, then we can give them a new identity, a new set of beliefs, and one that aligns with our ultimate goal. And the ultimate goal of communism obviously is full control, but it's one identity for all the people. So, which is godless, and it sees the state as the ultimate moral authority.
Yeah. So this is interesting what you're saying. So then maybe what you're suggesting, you can comment on this, is that individuals that are going to universities today, they're not being educated, but they're just being radicalized. Is that correct, you say?
I think in some cases radicalized for sure. I mean, it's online. We've seen crazy things come out of universities. And again, I think
because a university used to be a place where people go to talk about ideas and discuss ideas, to sit, this is what I think, this is what I think, and then have dialogue, open dialogue about the way that we think. At least that's the classical way of thinking, asking questions and inviting dialogue. But if that's shifting towards communism, then it's kind of just destroying tradition and moving people away from their foundation.
Yeah. And it's so what is the goal? It's the state not just controlling speech, controlling religion, but even controlling your beliefs and your thoughts. So this is very interesting. I spoke at an event that memorialized Charlie Kirk, and there were a few other speakers. One of them was a professor at a university based in Southern California,
Mm-hmm.
and she taught a free speech class. Okay. So we were having this side conversation, and she was telling me that she had to get creative on how she talked about the assassination of Charlie Kirk so that her students would not think that she was a radical far right person, to get them thinking about the importance of free speech in the free speech class.
That's interesting.
On university.
How ironic, right?
It's totally ironic. It's totally backwards. So you're teaching a free speech class, but you don't even feel safe that you as a professor, that your speech is protected and free.
Mm-hmm.
And why did she feel scared? Because if she says something that goes against what is the acceptable beliefs, then her job is at risk. Even her safety might be at risk in some radical cases. Her family could be doxxed. These are all very real things that I feel like we've gotten desensitized to.
Yeah. So we started talking about like martyrs, right? And we started talking about how there's martyrs all over the world. There's Christian persecution. And then which is all often assumed that it's radical Islam that's doing that. And now we've shifted to the state. So do you see then that as we continue to move forward into the future, that the greatest cause of Christian persecution is going to be this sort of communistic statism?
It's the greatest cause already. So because we have so much news attention on radical Islam, and it should be, right? We often aren't paying attention to the reality of communism, but communism is the number one cause of the persecution of Christians.
And you see Western countries that were democratic places now moving in this direction.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. So if we
What about like what's happening in UK, for instance?
Yeah, so in Europe, they have these anti-discrimination laws, as I mentioned. So let me explain to you a few things, and I would love to send resources on these because these are documented cases. There's articles, but they just don't make, again, the mainstream media. So what's happening all throughout Europe is Christians particularly are disproportionately affected by these anti-discrimination laws. So there was a case I believe it was about 13 months ago, where a woman was standing on a sidewalk outside of an abortion clinic. And she was praying silently. She wasn't saying anything. And the European police come up to her. They ask her, "What are you doing?" And through conversation, they determined that she was praying silently, and they arrested her because it is illegal to pray silently in front of an abortion clinic.
Praying silently, not even saying
Correct.
anything.
Because of anti-discrimination laws. So if you pray, and you're staying true to your deeply held religious beliefs in front of an abortion clinic, that could be seen as hate speech or, hateful conduct toward another person, and people are being arrested. Another case, there was a man who was reading from the Bible in public. He was reading from the book of Genesis. He wasn't, crazy. He wasn't even that loud. He was just reading and then preaching a little bit. So as he was reading, there was a group of people that reported him to the police for hate speech. Why? Because he said male and female, he created them. He was arrested on camera and put in jail. The last story I'll share with you as one of these examples is it's not just, regular private citizens. There was a Finnish member of parliament who, we're going back like years ago, had tweeted her stance on traditional marriage and then some scriptures and basically just, like basic Christian teaching. Somebody dug up her tweets and she was arrested, put in jail, was facing years of prison time for her old tweets that were simply just her Christian belief expression.
Yeah.
She ended up winning her case, thank God. But I believe that is very real for the United States, and it's already happening in the West.
A couple of things I want to ask as we start to wind this down, because you have so much to share, Gia, and we're grateful that you're on campus at SU, because these are things that we want our students to become aware of, because maybe the stereotype idea, and I'm not saying this is the case for everybody, but the stereotype idea is when we talk about Christian persecution, we think about something in the 1040 window, and that's the only place that it's at. But you're saying, hey, this is closer to home than you actually realize. It's not as far away and as distant as you might think. And it's certainly through communism becoming a threat to the West more and more every day. It's already here, and it's a continued growing problem. So first thing that I want to ask is, with this in mind, how important is it to have colleges and universities that are committed to their core values of free speech and Western democracy?
It's very important. And I feel so grateful for universities like SEU and, a few other private universities, but mostly Christian universities that are doing their best to protect free speech. Also the dignity of the family and the human person. And of course, Western democracy, it's very important. And I want to add one more thing. If you are a student not on a campus like that, I would encourage you, for as difficult as it can be and as much as you could be canceled and all those things, we need more people who are going to be bold enough to continue to speak out and to not be silenced and not be afraid to live out your deeply held Christian beliefs, especially on campus, but in every area of society.
From where you sit, you're doing all this work out here with the persecuted church, and you're involved in this. What would you say to professors and faculty and university leaders, given your experience, about what we've shared today, as far as how they should go about their leadership and lead within the structures of a university?
I think my same message to students is the same message to professors. Don't be afraid to talk about these subjects. I think another thing that we've kind of seen trending in the U.S. is churches and Christian universities were afraid to get political, right? If we think about it, Christian persecution, a lot of time it's seen as a political issue. These topics are hot button, they're controversial. But why are they controversial? It's because if we have an opinion that's against the status quo, the powers that be try to silence us. But if we had more people that were unashamed to speak the truth on these sensitive issues, it wouldn't be so risky, so to speak, to talk about these things.
Yeah, and what would you say to students as far as they want to be involved? They want to help the persecuted church. What is your core message to them, how they can get involved? given what you've said about communism and what you've said about where things are at today? How can they tangibly go from just student status to I'm working to help the voice of Christians who are being persecuted and suffering today?
The first thing that I would say is to not underestimate the power of your voice. I was 23 years old when I founded my organization. I still had a lot to learn. I still have a lot to learn to this day. But if I can be totally truthful, and I have been so humbled by how impactful the work that we are doing has been, and the places that we've been able to go just by saying yes, and just through the grace of God. And it hasn't been easy, but just by continuing to move forward and believing that this mission is so important that there's urgency around it. If I can do that, from Orange County, California, every student here on campus, for whatever it is in their heart, you don't have to wait to be a certain age, to have certain qualifications, to have the right connections. Start now with what you have, and don't underestimate the power of your voice and what God will do through you, and amazing things will happen. The other thing I will say is, unfortunately, it is the case that we have to seek this information out about what's happening with the persecuted church. So I would say, I would encourage people to do their research. Of course, you can follow at March for the Martyrs. We're always sharing statistics and stories from the persecuted church. And bring those statistics and stories to your pastor, to your professor. Can we get, Bible studies or prayer services for the persecuted? And it's each person that is bringing those stories to somebody else that creates an entire movement.
Gia, I am thoroughly impressed with your work and all that you're doing. It's our honor that you're at SCU today. It's not every day that you have somebody that is not just has a heart for the persecuted church, but is out there working with it, and at such a young age. I think your work's incredible. It is super important that we consider that Christian persecution comes in many shapes, forms, and sizes, and the threat of communism is real. So thank you for speaking out about it. Thank you for not being afraid to be political and to raise your voice. And we're so thankful that you're here today.
Thank you so much for having me. And I also want to say thank you to SCU for bringing me in to talk about Christian persecution and just allowing these conversations to be had on campus. It's been an honor, and it's very important.
It's our pleasure.